So Michael Popak, Legal AF. If Donald Trump is restored to the presidency, one of his first acts will be the dismantling of the Department of Justice to remove any semblance of independence between the executive branch and the Department of Justice and the Attorney General. And it will be led by people like Jeff Clark, who've also been indicted in places like Georgia, and are unindicted co-conspirators by Jack Smith. Those followers of Donald Trump have created a shadow government. It's known as Project 2025. They reside in various right-wing MAGA think tanks. They are ready to be restored if the American people vote for Donald Trump over Joe Biden. Now, what's the first thing that somebody who's been our most criminal president ever, who led the kleptocracy when he was president, what's the first thing that they do? Get rid of the guardrails around our democracy led by the Department of Justice. And Jeff Clark, for instance, who is a spiritual, emotional leader and advisor for Donald Trump on the legal affairs, has written articles and has told Donald Trump that the independence of the Department of Justice is a fiction and it doesn't exist. Now, after J. Edgar Hoover of the FBI was eventually left, and the Nixon era, there has been a strong historical precedence for the separation and the checks and balance, even within the executive branch of the Department of Justice. Now, for people that aren't from this country or from around the world that are our followers and our listeners, and even for people here, it's important to remember that the Department of Justice does not sit in the judiciary branch of our government. It sits in the executive branch of our government. The three branches: executive, judiciary, and legislative. Legislative are the two houses of Congress. Judiciary are the Article III judges that make up the federal court system, along with some lower-level non-Article III judges. And then there's the Article II, which is the executive branch, which is occupied by one person. That person is called the President of the United States, assisted by a vice president, and then, of course, cabinet members and other people in the West Wing. The Department of Justice is an arm not of the judicial branch, because there needs to be a separation of church and state, separation of the branches in our co-equal system of government, and therefore you've got the Department of Justice sitting under the presidency, which usually, except when you have a corrupt president like Nixon and Trump, usually is fine, especially when there's an established independence led by somebody like Merrick Garland or other heads of our Department of Justice in the past, Eric Holder and the like. When you have a corrupt president who could be reelected or could be restored, it's not reelected, but restored to the presidency, with him comes, he's been overt about it. He has said the following. Donald Trump has said he will appoint a special prosecutor to go after the most corrupt president in our history. I was just waiting for him to say Donald Trump. Instead, he said Joe Biden and the Biden crime family. Talk about projection. Talk about trying to gaslight us. Everything he just said about Joe Biden is exactly what's going on with the Trump crime family and Trump himself. So he's going to appoint a special prosecutor to go after Joe Biden and his crime family. Okay, I don't know what the special prosecutor is all about. If Joe Biden is no longer the president of the United States, the regular old Department of Justice led by somebody handpicked by Donald Trump can go after him. But again, Donald Trump doesn't understand the special counsel process. And I thought his lawyers were busy saying that the special counsel was invalid and improperly appointed and improperly funded, and there shouldn't be special counsel. So that's the big challenge that Judge Cannon finds interesting down in Florida. Well, be that as it may for a minute. I mean, Donald Trump's never been accused of being consistent in his thought process, right? You don't have these anomalous thoughts being occupying his brain at the same time. So he's going to appoint a prosecutor to go after Joe Biden. That's not a thumbs up for that. That's just a little thing that pops up on my YouTube occasionally. So he's going to do that. Then he's going to install people like Jeff Clark and other like-minded sycophants, insurrectionists, into positions of power, not just at the Department of Justice, where it matters, of course, the Attorney General position. Could be Jeff Clark, for all I know. If it's not him, it's somebody just like him. Then lawyers will end up driving the train for Donald Trump in the various cabinet departments and the various departments of our government. You know, whatever departments are left, energy, you know, education, welfare, housing, you know, those types of things, trade, commerce, state, defense, they'll be occupied by, yes, right-wing MAGA, but also backed by lawyers who are right-wing lawyers who are going to execute on Trump's plan. I mean, he's very public about it. It's not like we have to guess. This isn't me speculating and spitballing about the takeover and the co-opting of the Department of Justice by Donald Trump if he gets back in office. He says it out loud. All you have to do is listen. It's like the old joke turned on its head. How do you know that Donald Trump's going to take over the Department of Justice and use it as a tool of his retribution? Because he says it. Because he says it out loud. And we have to be listening and evaluating constantly as we go to the polls. The only polls that matter are the ones in November. All this polling, I mean, it's interesting. It sells ads somewhere. It sells papers. The more, you know, it's like a basketball game where, you know, the score is up 40 points or 50 points, but the announcers are still making it out to be a close game. Well, they could come back here. All they got to do is go on a 40-0 run. You know, I think Joe Biden is way ahead, by the way. But polling doesn't matter. Polls matter. And the polls that matter on November 5. And so if on November, as we lead into November 5, you need to evaluate the candidates. And if things like I am going to co-opt and dismantle the Department of Justice, I am going to continue to pack the United States Supreme Court with right-wing MAGA. It's already 6-3 in that direction. We lose somebody like Justice Sotomayor, God forbid, or anybody else on the other side. It then becomes 7-2. Talk about a lopsided advantage for MAGA. You don't like where your constitutional rights have gone into the shredder with this Supreme Court? You're going to love, you don't like that? You're going to love what's going to happen next if Donald Trump gets 1 or, God forbid, 2. Why don't we just make it 8-1? 8-1, everything that Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito want, they will get in terms of throwing up the hood of our democracy and tinkering with the engine and removing and eviscerating all constitutional rights that matter. I never would have thought that I would say, for instance, in this end of term 2024, we're still waiting in June for decisions on abortion, gun control, immunity of a president, all in one term. I went to law school. I learned constitutional law. I study still constitutional law. Issues like that get spread out over generations. This Supreme Court can't stop itself from talking about and making bad decisions about a woman's right to choose and reproductive rights and reproductive integrity. Same thing about guns. We used to stay away from that, the United States Supreme Court, right? These were enshrined rights one way or the other, and we didn't touch them for generations. Now it's like every year, let's take up abortion again. Let's take up gun control again. And it always goes in the wrong direction. And voting rights, every time they touch voting rights, and it's every year, every term, they fiddle with it and destroy another element of the Voting Rights Act from the Great Society. And so when I talk about here, because there's no other place for me to talk about it, that Donald Trump is publicly announced that he will do away with the independence of the Department of Justice, I want you to think through the apocalyptic dystopian world that results with a actual criminal president, not just one we call a criminal, a convicted criminal as president, who in retribution against Democrats and what he sees as his political enemies, he goes after using the tool of the Department of Justice, the only entity that enters a courtroom and is allowed to announce that they represent the United States of America. And that Leviathan, with all of the resources that Donald Trump will give it, without any guardrails or protections, going after average citizens, not just Joe Biden and his family, but average citizens, should scare the crap out of everybody. That alone should be the reason, if you're looking for one, and I could give you thousands of reasons why Donald Trump should never get, he shouldn't even get a tour of the White House through his local congressperson, let alone occupy the Oval Office and be the leader of the free world, right? That should never happen. But I want you to understand the ramifications of it. Supreme Court, continued reshaping. Federal judiciary. Now, Joe Biden will beat Donald Trump in getting judges confirmed to the federal bench, but they retire all the time. And there's new positions that open up all the time. And they have to be filled. And if we give Trump yet another opportunity to fill the judiciary, he'll reshape it the way he did back in 2016 to 2020. And it will be a generational shift in the federal judiciary led by Federalist Society judges who all look, talk, and think exactly like AILEEN Cannon down in Florida. So if she scares you, if you think she's incompetent, if you think she is somebody who's bending over backwards for the first time in her life, for somebody that's usually so harsh on defendants in her courtroom, but suddenly, because it's Donald Trump and she's a Federalist, if you like her, you're going to love the cookie cutter process that's going to come out of other new judges under Donald Trump that are going to be appointed. How about AILEEN Cannon on the United States Supreme Court? People think that's that far-fetched? What do you think the reward is going to be for her if he successfully delays his trial in Mar-a-Lago until he gets restored to the presidency and then pardons himself and others? You don't think she's going to get potentially put on the 11th Circuit or worse, D.C. Circuit or Supreme Court? I shudder to think. And then and he's already made the list. The 2025 project means they already have, we love talking about binders. They already have binders of diagrams and flowcharts and organograms about how they're going to reshape the federal judiciary and the Department of Justice, starting with who's going to be at the top. Look for Jeff Clark. And then all the other bootlickers underneath him. And then they place lawyers in all of the key cabinet positions that are controlled ultimately by the Department of Justice and by Donald Trump. And then they go after the federal judiciary. Watch Stephen Miller, who runs America First Legal, AF Legal. Sound familiar? Watch him come back to the White House. And he'll be involved, even though he's not a lawyer. He'll be involved with picking new judges. And when Bannon gets out of prison, and when Peter Navarro gets out of prison, and now that Manafort is out of prison, and now that Flynn has been exonerated, or not exonerated, has been pardoned, and all of the other criminals and all of the others that have lost their bar licenses all come home to roost in the White House under Donald Trump. Rudy Giuliani's not a lawyer. He can still be attorney general. Let me repeat that. Rudy Giuliani could be, or anybody could be, an attorney general who's not a lawyer. There's no requirement in the Constitution. The attorney general is not mentioned in the Constitution. There's no requirement that he be a lawyer or she be a lawyer. Rudy Giuliani, a disbarred lawyer who is about to be criminally prosecuted for what he's doing in the bankruptcy world, in trying to beat out his creditors, including Ruby Freeman and Shane Moss, he could be Attorney General of the United States. All right? Or he could be the number 2. He could be the head of the criminal division. Jeff Clark could be the head of the civil division, or the Attorney General himself. Think of this world. I'm not making a movie. This isn't Civil War, although it is. So I got to bring it to you here, right here on the Midas Touch Network, and on this particular YouTube channel. Free subscribe, help Midas Touch get to 3 million before November. Do you see how important it is? We're building this network together with our bare hands. 4 years ago, my co-founder, Ben Meiselas, and me came up with the name Legal AF for a podcast, and now you know why. It's every Wednesday and Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on the Midas Touch Network, and then on major podcast platforms of your choice. Follow me, Michael Popak. Go over to Midas Touch YouTube. Look for Popak under playlists, under contributors. You'll find 1,200 of my hot takes just like this one. And if you like learning about the law at the intersection of law and politics, join our Patreon. It's a way to support us. We have no outside investors. Patreon.com/legalaf for exclusive content. So until my next hot take, until my next Legal AF, this is Michael Popak reporting.